Peace be upon you all, and welcome to this new episode of Seeing God in Biology, where we're kicking off a new season with an interesting topic, the topic of the hour, AI, where everybody has almost been playing around with things like ChatGPT and Bard. And we have Dr. Fuz Rana with us. Fuz, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Ahmed. It's great to be back with you. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, so Seeing God in Biology, where we're talking about God's creation and we're looking for, traces or fingerprints that God has left us to find Him. And then all of a sudden, we have this AI thing coming center stage, and many people are starting to question, well, this looks like a human when you're talking to it. And what we're going to be talking to do today about is what sets a human apart from AI. What makes us human? And since you are not only an expert in biochemistry, but also you have your studies and readings in anthropology, so I think this would be a great discussion. And maybe I can add something when we're looking at the computer engineering part of it. So the first thing, what comes in your mind from your personal experience with things like ChatGPT or Bard or those other AI tools that are coming, generative AI tools that are coming center stage today?
Yeah, well, it, I tend to be a technology optimist. I look forward to technological advances. I tend to see technological advances overall being positive for human beings and improving the quality of our lives, promoting human flourishing. But with every technology, there are unintended consequences. Technologies can be misused, and the more powerful the technology, the greater those types of concerns are. So those concerns definitely exist for me when it comes to AI technology. But there's something a bit eerie at times when you're
Hmm.
interacting with, uh, you know, applications like Chat GPT, because it almost feels as if you are, as you pointed out, Ahmed, that we are interacting with something that appears to be or feels to be human-like at times. And I wonder if generative AI systems could probably pass the Turing test. This is the test proposed by Alan Turing in 1950 to determine if a machine could think. And his argument was, look, if your interaction with the machine is indistinguishable from your interaction with a human being, you'd have to conclude that the machine is thinking. Now, there's a lot of things that we could be critical about with regard to that Turing test, but the point being is that, boy, at times it really does feel like these generative AI systems are very much human-like. And if anybody is a thinking person, you begin to wonder, are human beings going to become irrelevant? Do we need human beings to write poetry, to write music, to produce art, to write a short story? Or is this something that an AI system could actually do? So it raises questions about our relevancy as human beings. What is our place now? But also more fundamental questions about who are we really as human beings? Are we really unique? Are we exceptional? Do we stand apart from other creatures? Do we stand apart from other entities? And if we can replicate a human being with a machine and very sophisticated software, does that mean that that's all that we are as human beings? Just very sophisticated biological machines. So there's some profound questions that emerge, out of advancing AI technology. And the more we interact with these systems, again, the more it feels like these systems are like us in many ways.
Well, very good start. So, how about starting from a fundamental question? What do you think, as a biochemist and somebody who has who have grounded knowledge in biology, what is the distinction to start with between human beings and other animals and other creatures? What sets us apart in your mind, and also as
Yeah,
a person who believes in God, I guess. Yeah.
yeah. I've given quite a bit of thought to this question over the years, because have the theological view that human beings are actually distinct from all other creatures. And this comes from,
mm,
how I read the Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 creation account, which describes human beings as being made in God's image. And Genesis 2 helps give a little bit of a insight as to maybe what that means, though theologians wrestle with what is the image of God precisely, because the Old Testament and the New Testament never describe it or define it. They just simply makes the assertion that we possess this quality uniquely called the image of God. And
mm,
you know, Genesis 2 gives some understanding as to what that might be, because we see Adam being made from the dust of the earth, and then God breathing the breath of life into him. And then later on in Genesis 2, it describes the animals being made from the dust of the earth, but they do not receive the divine breath. So I see the image of God as some kind of quality that humans uniquely possess compared to other creatures, that is maybe spiritual in nature or immaterial in nature, that other creatures don't have. But it also means that there's going to be biological similarities that we share with other creatures, that there very well could even be behavioral similarities that we have with other creatures, but that at the same time, there's something that distinguishes us that seems to be um, uh, immaterial in nature. Now, one of the things that I find interesting is that when you look at anthropology, for the last 150 years, the study of humanity and human origins has been shaped by Darwin's view that human beings
mm,
are the product of evolution, that we only differ in degree, not kind, from other creatures, that there's nothing fundamentally distinct about us. And remarkably, that view is being challenged by a growing number of anthropologists who say, actually, there's something special about human beings.
mm,
And there's a debate as to what that is, but it's not unusual for people that are deeply steeped in the evolutionary paradigm who would say humans actually are exceptional. There are things that we do that no other creature does, that we seem to stand apart from other creatures. And, you know, again, there's a number of ideas as to what that is. Many of them center around what we would call symbolism, our ability as humans to represent the world and even ideas with symbols, and then to manipulate those symbols in
mm,
a near infinite number of ways, because you've got all these combinatorial possibilities. But then we use that to be able to tell stories, to do what's called mental time travel, where we can project back ourselves back into the past and relive the past, or even alter the past hypothetically, speculating and reflecting on different possible outcomes. We can
mm,
anticipate what the future is going to be like in different scenarios, or we study the world and we produce theories about what's going on in the world that guides us. And this ability is manifested not only in language, but it's in music and in art, even in what's called body ornamentation. And so
mm,
we uh, seem to be unique compared to other creatures in that we have these two capacities that seem to express themselves at a very sophisticated level. Now,
mm,
there's some evidence that maybe some animals might have limited capacity for symbolism or for manipulating symbols. There's some interesting experiments that have been done with chimps that suggest that maybe they might have these capabilities. But with humans, uh, if there are those capabilities in animals, they are very, very primitive and are nowhere nearly as sophisticated as we are. There's a great book, if people are interested in this topic, called The Gap. It's written by
mm,
Thomas Sudendorf, who's not a friend necessarily to any kind of religious perspective. But he argues
mm,
that, or he makes this comparison, from an evolutionary perspective, chimpanzees and bonobos our closest evolutionary relative. Presumably, we shared relatively recently a common ancestor. And, he points out, look, chimps are just about to go extinct, hanging on in, these rainforests, whereas we as human beings have put human beings on the moon, right? There's
Hmm.
got to be something fundamentally different about us that
Yeah.
explains those very different trajectories. Or, if you look at the archaeological record, we see Neanderthals, which I think are distinct from human beings, actually on Earth longer than we've been on Earth, and their technology was remarkable in some respects, but it was stagnant. It remained unchanged for the entire duration of their existence. Whereas humans come on the
Hmm.
scene and we have, begin with primitive technology, but again, in a short period of time, we've put somebody on the moon. And again, the question is, well, what is it that separates humans and Neanderthals? And again, it comes back to this this capacity for symbolism that seemingly allows for the explosive evolution of technology, where we, can develop technology, we describe what we're doing and how it works, and we're able to pass that information on to the next generation, who in turn can build on that, right? That build on that understanding. So
Yeah.
there seems to be something, that indeed does distinguish us from animals and from even creatures like Neanderthals. And for my best analysis, it seems like it's symbolism in our open-ended generative capacity. Now, these
Hmm.
are behavioral properties that we manifest. You can clearly see brain structures that seemingly correspond to our capability to do these things. As a recent study, I haven't gone through it in detail yet, saying that there are these association areas in our brain that allow us to take different information, different types of
Hmm.
cognition, and integrate it in such a way that we have this profound understanding that emerges. Whereas, chimpanzees don't have these areas that are as large and as well developed as we do. So there seems like there's
Hmm.
a biological basis for this. But I take the view that, again, for human beings, there's a material aspect of our nature and an immaterial aspect of our nature, and that we're not ghosts in the machine. Christian theology says, no, we're not ghosts in the machine, but there seems to be this integration between our spiritual and our physical natures, um, that they are intertwined in so it's kind of like a computer hardware and a computer software situation, that both have to be present. uh, One without the other doesn't work, right? They both have to be present. And where I would see our immaterial aspect as being like the software, our brains like the hardware. And so you would expect that if we are immaterial beings and really our uniqueness arises out of our immaterial nature, that there would be physical means by which to express that uniqueness, that exceptional nature, so that we can affect the real world that we live in. And so I think you see kind of this confluence of where anthropology is and where neuroscience is and where theology would have us, in a way that it creates this coherent picture that I think there's something is special about us as human beings.
Yeah. Great thoughts. So you started from the theological aspect. So while you were talking, um, one verse of the Quran hit me. So it's in a surah called Ar-Rahman, and Ar-Rahman means the All Merciful. So it starts like this: Ar-Rahman, the All Merciful, علم القرآن, he taught the Quran, خلق الإنسان, he created the human being, and then the first thing he mentions after the human being is علمه البيان, he taught him self-expression.
Mhm.
So just right after mentioning humanity, it is like self-expression, which has, I think, a lot of what you have been talking about goes around this point, being able to
Mm.
express yourself in different means, being able to use symbols. I think writing comes as a great means of self-expression, because it means that accumulated knowledge in your life can pass to the next generation. Um, and it also reminds me of the first surah that came down in the Quran, which is called Surah Al-Alaq. And Al-Alaq means like a blood clot. And it also starts off like this: اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. Read or recite in the name of your Lord who has created. خلق الإنسان من علق, created humanity out of clinging clot. اقرأ وربك الأكرم. Read or recite in the name of your Lord who is the most generous. الذي علم بالقلم, the one who taught with the pen. So it's again علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. He taught the human what he didn't know. So it again refers, right after mentioning creation of humanity, it talks about a means of self-expression, which is writing,
Mm-hmm.
and that this and that there is an infusion of knowledge from God to humanity. So yeah, self-expression is something great. But now the greatest question is, this GPT does express itself, and sometimes, as you say,
Yeah.
pretty well. So
Yeah.
you also mentioned Turing. And the first thing that strikes me is, how did this guy even invent the test? I mean, 1950s, nobody would have thought that ChatGPT is even possible. You know,
Right.
the machines that they had at that time were totally nothing compared to your mobile phone today. You know, and he devises this test where you can be talking to a machine, and now you're struggling with making the distinction, and he tells you, if you cannot make the distinction, then the machine has reached human intelligence. So this guy had something in him, you know. um, but now what you have said is brings us to the next question: what sets a human being from a computer? If self-expression sets us apart from animals, and now we have computers coming center stage with things like ChatGPT and Bard and those tools, and those tools can self-express. What do you think sets us apart from them? Did it trick you? If you didn't know that you were talking to ChatGPT, do you think at some point of time it felt like you're talking to a human in your experience? In my experience, sometimes it felt I'm talking to a human. Actually,
Yeah.
sometimes I would make it fall. I'm not sure in your experience what it looks like.
Yeah. And there's really, I've given a lot of thought to this question. Now, I'm not sure that my answer is necessarily profound or reflects the effort that I've put into this, but there's really maybe two aspects to my response to that, uh,
Hmm.
and they both again center around this question: what is it that really makes us unique and exceptional as human beings? And
Yeah.
there's an interesting series of papers that have been published by an animal behavioral scientist in Sweden named Johan Lind,
Hmm.
and he is of the opinion that we underestimate the power of associative learning.
Hmm.
There's been some recent studies done in animal behaviors that
Hmm.
indicate that animals are pretty remarkable creatures, that maybe at times we tend to sell them short. They seem to be able to problem solve, to anticipate the future, and even to plan. They have an
Hmm.
emotional richness to their lives that people didn't fully appreciate. And and he argues that maybe this behavior isn't that they are doing something that's just a little bit less sophisticated than what we're doing as humans. As in other words, he's arguing that maybe they don't really just differ in degree, but that still they fundamentally different in they differ in kind, because he argues that uh, that associative learning can actually produce some very sophisticated behaviors, and he developed a computer model that he
Hmm.
calls A learning, A for associative learning. And he showed that you could actually, through this model and through the simulations, produce behaviors in these, hypothetical animals that would be identical to the behaviors that have been observed in these animal studies. And
Hmm.
so he argues that with associative learning, right, you are associating an action with either a reward or a punishment. But he said if you have any capacity for trace memory, back chaining is possible, where animals will connect, or they can connect multiple sequences of events with an ultimate reward or an ultimate punishment. And that
Hmm.
because of that, that produces very sophisticated behaviors that seem like these animals are planning, that they are problem solving, but in fact, what they're doing is very different than what we're doing. So instead of problem solving through associative learning as human beings, we problem solve through mental time travel, where we create alternate scenarios in our minds and look at what would be the cause and effect relationships that emerge out of those alternate scenarios. And then we step in and we solve problems that way. Not to say that there's not any associative learning at all or
Hmm.
trial and error, but in the sense he argues this is what animals are doing, so that they're behaving in a fundamentally different way. Now, what's interesting is that his inspiration for these ideas came from studying AI systems,
Hmm.
where AI
Amazing.
systems are operating with machine learning, right? And machine
Yeah.
learning is ultimately associative learning. You
Yeah.
create these rewards or these punishments, right? And then the machine learning algorithm tries different solutions, and then based on the reward and punishment will actually solve problems or can even discover patterns and things like that. So he's arguing that really animals are like AI systems, uh, and that they are fundamentally distinct from us. That where we engage in flexible planning, their problem solving is through a type of an associative learning. So what that suggests to me is that AI systems are doing sophisticated things and will do even more sophisticated things because of the computational power and the sophistication of these machine learning algorithms. But at the end of the day, they really are doing something fundamentally different than what we're doing. Now, the second part of my answer is, as human beings, we also have a quality called theory of mind, where we recognize that others have minds like ours, and that therefore we can anticipate what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And because of that, we anthropomorphize, right? So we attribute human qualities and motivations to animals all the time. We,
Hmm.
we do the same thing with machines, right? And so, because of the fact that we personify things that are inanimate, or we personify animals because of this anthropomorphism, it means that when we interpret the behavior of animals, we can't help ourselves but to attribute human qualities to them when, in fact, they may be doing something very different than we are. When an
Okay.
AI system is very much like us, then we tend to attribute human qualities to it that it doesn't possess. We can't turn that theory of mind off. We can't turn our tendency to anthropomorphize off, even when we are aware that we are doing it. It's just something that's very natural. That's very much part of who we are as human beings. So you know, uh, Hanson Robotics. You probably know more about Sophia than I do. You know,
Hmm.
she's a robot powered by an AI system
Yeah.
designed to mimic human emotion, with the goal of having the user form emotional bonds with her, right? Well, she's a machine. It's all machine learning, uh, but she's very sophisticated and very good at mimicking us. So much so that we tend to think about Sophia as being just really almost like us as a human being, to the point where we are willing to form an emotional bond with a machine because of our because we anthropomorphize.
Yeah. Very great insights. Um, yeah. So you think it might be that we're thinking about AI as being close to humans because this is our own reflection of their behavior rather than maybe it's not their real, maybe it's not their real nature, or probably it's not.
Yes, yes.
So great. In my mind, um, and maybe that would bring us to the second question. Um, in my mind, as somebody who has worked for a lifetime with computers, the unmistakable distinction between a computer and a human, in my mind, if you give a task to a computer and a task to a human, and let's say both of them accomplish the task, let's say it's a complex task that needs a human, and now we have something like ChatGPT, and you give the task to the human and to the computer, and both of them accomplish the task and give a good response. Okay. Now, irrespective of the fact that maybe ChatGPT will give a faster answer or not, I think a fundamental distinction is that while a human is doing the task or anything in his life, the human is experiencing something.
Hmm.
I think a computer is experiencing nothing. Um, Maybe this is the opposite of what you were saying about anthropomorphizing it. So I think this is the disanthropomorphization. It gets to be a very big word, you know. So yeah, so um, I think that what sets us apart doesn't set us apart from an animal, because I think animals are experiencing things, and
Hmm.
you can see it in the eyes of your pet. So
Yes.
but I'm almost positive that a computer is experiencing nothing. So even if you make Sophia or Amica or ChatGPT or Bard sound like a human because it's basing its responses on human text that it's reading, it's essentially a language model, and that's what language models are trained on. They are trained on human language. So they will just keep using expressions in human language which has emotions in them because they're human. But at the core of the computer, um, it's at the end of the day just matrices of numbers and just code being
Hmm.
executed. So if the question is, if AI is on the way to behave like humans, which is, if you're looking at behavioral models, maybe if you're looking at it from the aspect of behavior, then it might as well trick us. In my mind, what makes AI not human is that AI is experiencing nothing. I'm
Mm.
not sure if you can call that consciousness or not, but because some people will have those arguments about what consciousness is, but I don't think a computer, even if it has AI running on it, actually feels anything. It doesn't feel happy. It doesn't feel sad. It doesn't feel tired. It doesn't feel bored. It doesn't feel excited. It doesn't feel anxious. It doesn't feel afraid. So I'm not, in my mind, the human condition is about experiencing life and experiencing remorse and experiencing guilt and experiencing happiness, etc. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think that I'm onto something here, or maybe not? What do you think?
Yeah, I actually think that's quite insightful, Ahmed. I've never thought about it in those terms, but I think that's a great way to distinguish. I think an AI system from a human is the fact that it really is not experiencing anything, and you can't really program it in such a way to experience that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
and
I had these discussions. Sometimes you can tell ChatGPT, what do you believe, or Bard, and it says, I actually don't believe something. But it's sometimes it's part of its programming that to respond this way to that question, because their manufacturer do not want you to be spooked from it. But now the question is, does it really believe? Does it really feel? Does it really experience anything? I'm sure you have worked with computers in many of your research,
right.
and we just give them, sequential set of instructions, and they just go through them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually very insightful. Yeah, because yeah, when you use a calculator to add two numbers, you don't even, I mean, to even say, well, what did that calculator just experience? I mean, that's almost an absurd question, right? But yet when
Yeah,
you are, but when you're inputting the numbers, right, and you're getting the answer, the sum, you actually are experiencing something. Or when you
yeah,
when you engage in that same task, when you add the two numbers together, whether on paper or in your head, you are experiencing something in that process. And when you get the right
absolutely.
answer, there's an element of a joy, maybe surprise, right?
Yeah,
You know,
especially when it's tough, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's a really interesting insight. I had never thought of it in those terms, but I think yeah, yeah, I I
And I
I buy your argument.
I'll take us to something that you actually started with that seemed very interesting and insightful to me, because some people can come to you and say, well, why do you think a computer is experiencing nothing? And you might give the answer, well, it's just silicon at the end, and p-n junctions, and diodes and transistors and just electricity flowing in them. And if you are talking to somebody who is a materialist, he will tell you, well, guess what? You are in your core just carbon, and those transistors and those diodes, etc. We can model them like those neurons and those synapses and those chemical pathways, and those chains of reactions, and those potassium and calcium stuff and sodium stuff, etc. And then it brings me to this question: is it really our brain that is experiencing anything, or it is our supernatural being that is experiencing anything? And it brings me back to what you've said, that when God talks about what sets us apart, it is His breath, right?
Hmm.
And even um, He's using almost the same expressions in the Quran, like you've mentioned in Genesis. So He says, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي, and I breathed from my soul into him. Um, so there is this element of something on top of the physical structure that gives humanity not just its experience, but an experience that is distinct from other creatures, where, yeah, God breathes life in them, definitely, or makes them animate, but not in the same way. He doesn't express it in the same way. So yeah, so the question with the materialist will be, or with the philosopher will be, when he asks us the question, well, why do you think the computer doesn't experience? And our answer will be, it's just silicon. Then he will go and tell us, you're just carbon. I think this is where yourself and myself, being people who believe that we are not just our flesh and blood, sets us apart. Yeah.
Yeah,
So there's the question: what sets humans apart from animals? What sets human apart from computers? And then, funny enough, it boils down to the question: what sets a religious person apart from somebody who is a total materialist? So
yeah,
yeah, it's very
yeah.
interesting how the discussion reaches to that point at the end,
Right.
to answer a
And and
scientific
and
question.
and there's a pretty vast philosophical literature on, the whole brain problem, and I've dabbled into that a little bit. So I'm by no means an expert whatsoever, and at times I find the discussion very difficult to follow as somebody who's a layperson in philosophy. But the crux of the argument for those people that hold to kind of a dualism is that the brain and the mind are not the same thing. And what they do is make these philosophical arguments to show that the brain and the mind are distinct. And once you have done that, you really have argued against kind of that materialistic approach that would argue that really the mind and the capacity to experience in, in your discussion is just simply flowing out of the complexity of the interactions in the brain, right? And likewise, the complexity of the interactions with transistors is going to produce, an entity that experiences. There's an assumption there that ultimately the brain and the mind are deeply intertwined and are in a sense equivalent. And
Yeah.
and so the philosophers who argue against that, make a philosophical case that the mind and the brain are distinct. I'm not sure that I completely follow the argument, if I'm to be fair, but I don't think it's because the argument is a bad argument. It's just simply I just have not, done a lot of work in
Well,
that area.
yeah. Well, I remember I had this interview with Dr. Josh, the philosopher who he's talking about consciousness.
Oh, was it
Josh Rasmussen.
yeah, right.
Yeah, and it was an interesting thing because he always referred to this thing about a human being able to internalize something, to reflect on something. He used this special word about internal inquiry. I cannot remember the exact expression that he was using. Um, and it brings to my mind something that I was talking about on my channel a couple of years ago, which is about, so in a computer, a process is happening, and maybe the process is about processing an image. But does an image have any meaning when it's inside the computer? And the answer to me as a computer engineer is no. The image is only an image when it's on a screen, because inside it's just, just numbers that are maybe not even in the same place for memory optimization or whatever. It might be compressed or something. And on the screen, it gets into this matrix of little pixels with three RGB components. And what makes the image an image is when a human is looking at an image, or an animal looking at the image, and we recognize it as an image. And then we need to ask ourselves, what happens to this image is that it goes into our brain. And in our brain, it is also a set of matrix of numbers or something,
Mhm.
represented in electrical, potentialities in our brain. And then it loses its meaning as an image. So the question is, who is looking at the image in our brain? Just like we're looking at the image in the computer through the screen, who is looking at the image in our brain and making sense out of it? And my argument was that our brain is this computer, and there needs to be a real user to this body, like we are the users of the computer. And
Mhm.
in my mind, not in my brain, in my mind, this user is our soul. It
Yeah,
is the entity that makes sense of what's in our brain, because what's in our brain is just like what's in a computer's RAM.
yeah.
Means nothing to the computer, and what's in our brain means nothing to our brain. So yeah, what do you think about that?
No, no,
I'm sure you
that's
got me.
yeah, yeah. That's a really great insight. And it seems to me that even when you're projecting an image onto a computer screen, that still has no meaning to the computer system. And the only time it might even have quote unquote meaning would be if you wrote an algorithm that then had the computer analyze the image looking for certain features that would then connote, you know, one scenario versus another scenario. So it seems to me that yeah, that there's no self-reflection that's happening at all in a machine, no matter how sophisticated that machine. Whereas, we are not only engaged in self-reflection, but we are capable of assigning meaning to things that I
Yeah,
think go beyond just simply uh, associations.
yeah. And you've said something very interesting now. It will only have a meaning when you have written an algorithm that's looking for certain features in the image. But guess what? The algorithm actually has a meaning to you, and the features has a meaning to you. It has no meaning to the computer, because the algorithm is still an agent for what you are looking for. And in my experience with ChatGPT and with those other things, nothing comes out until you prompt it, you know?
Yes.
So the prompt is what you want to know, and the answer is what you want to know. And even if you make it self-prompt, somebody must tell it to self-prompt itself for something. So I think, yeah, that can take us maybe to the next question, which when I was asking you, in your mind, do you believe this or that? So I think when we reflect inside, um, and we find beliefs and we find convictions and we find things that we hang on tight to, what do you think gives humanity or humans the ability to believe in things? Is there something in biochemistry or biology that's talking about believing in things or something? Is there something about the chemistry of the brain? What does biochemistry, what can it tell us about this, and what can anthropology tell us about this?
Yeah, and to me, I if you're just thinking about this strictly now in biological terms, it goes back to the I think this idea of symbolism and the open-ended ability to manipulate symbols. That we are able to construct beliefs which are essentially scenarios that we uh, accept as true about the world or about something that's happening within the world, right? So it's our capacity to believe emerges, I think, out of our ability for symbolism and again the ability to manipulate those symbols to create scenarios that we then accept as being true. And even the ability to validate our beliefs by you know uh, experimentation or observation of some sort ultimately hinges on our capacity for symbolism. And while I do think that there are brain structures that again, support our ability to think symbolically, ultimately I think that capacity for symbolism and that open-ended generative capacity is originating out of our immaterial nature or immaterial aspect. So, I see belief as again connected to that which makes us unique as human beings and is explained by our capacity for symbolism. But that capacity for symbolism, as we're talking about self-reflection and about imparting meaning to images, has to arise ultimately out of that same capacity for self-reflection and for interpreting or giving meaning to images. It seems like it's all intertwined to me.
Yeah, so the word that Rasmussen was using, I think it was introspection.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So when I have sometimes discussions with people, I tell him, let's say I'm having a discussion with somebody who's an atheist, and I tell him, you need to take a choice to believe. Believing in God, for example, is a choice that you need to take. And then he would just immediately go, maybe you have had similar discussions. He would say, I cannot choose to believe. I either believe or I don't. And I tell him, no, you can choose to believe and you can choose to deny, because sometimes something is very obvious. Maybe a loved one is convicted, maybe he's guilty, and you choose not to believe that he's guilty because you love him. You find him excuses. You say that no, it must have been a mistake or something, and you can choose to believe that something is false or true because you don't want to believe otherwise. Um, so the question is, if believing, which is part of our experience, is something that sets us apart, and some of it is subjective. Number one, do you think that somebody can choose to believe in God or choose to deny God? And then, can AI choose to believe, in your opinion? Let's take them in sequence.
Yeah, that's a
Did you
great.
choose to believe in God? This is a question. Or you just had
I
to believe in God?
I I I I think it would. I think I chose to believe in God. I don't think it was something that was forced upon me, right? And to from a maybe philosophical slash theological perspective, to for God to force somebody to believe would seems to me to be counter to this idea that God wants us to approach Him in love, right? That love is ultimately, for love to have meaning, there has to be that freedom to choose to love another person. If you're
Wow.
coercing that person to love you, it's not truly love, right? It's
Yes.
something very different. And so if God is forcing us to believe, then, and it's not a choice, then it's essentially the ultimate form of coercion, right? And it has really very little meaning. So I think
Yeah.
theologically and philosophically, you know, to me, it makes sense that I have some capacity to choose to believe, in God, and to choose to respond to the love that God is offering towards me, for it to ultimately have any kind of meaning, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of, you have to be very careful if you are someone who is an atheist or a non-theist and you're making these kind of arguments, because if you're saying, well, look, you're simply believing because you're hardwired in that way, or it's the outworking of neurochemistry, and
Yeah.
I choose not to believe for that same reason, then it means that there's no reason for me to think that atheism or non-theism is a true belief system, right? If you're forced to believe what you believe, and I'm forced to believe what I believe because I have no choice in the matter, and you have no choice, then it's hard to know that there's anything that's really true about the world. Do we think something is true just simply because we're forced by our neurochemistry to those conclusions? So once you start taking away this volition to choose, you undermine the entirety of, there's no such thing as truth, and means that the scientific enterprise is really meaningless at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely. The funny thing is that when I'm having such a discussion with somebody who's an atheist, who's an atheist, for example, so I tell him, You don't have choice. Are you telling me you're a machine? Are you dead?" And
Right.
then somebody might be, "Well, I'm as good as a machine." Some of them, they just have this kind of strange guts to say these things. So I say, okay, if you're a machine, there is no point having this discussion forward, because you're just a machine, and it doesn't make any difference what a machine thinks, right?
Yeah.
This is something. So it strikes me that this is a question, because the way computers actually work is that they just have these inputs, and these inputs are, like, at the rock bottom of what they are. They are just zeros and ones, and it is essentially a neural network is a mathematical computation, and it has almost a deterministic output. And the only thing that might make ChatGPT give you an answer different than mine is the exact prompt that you have given. Maybe a little comma or apostrophe would make it give this what, if it's the same exact model at the same temporal point. If both of us are inputting exactly the same prompt under exactly the same conditions, we're likely to get the same result. Um, so can AI just choose to believe, or AI is essentially a deterministic model, is the question. And can this be one of the things that set us apart, that there is
No.
something in us that is outside the physical realm that puts this intangible, indeterministic aspect? And it's funny how this thing is again going back into philosophy of choice, and whether this is a deterministic, mechanical world, or there is this aspect of indeterminism and choice in it. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah,
What can
I
you
think
say when we're
that's
looking at
yeah,
AI?
I think
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's really great insight again. Is because if an AI system says, well, this must be true or this must be false, it's essentially responding to inputs that are then passed through some kind of evaluative grid where there's a score given to it, a punishment or a reward,
yeah,
if something is true or something is false. But somebody outside of that AI system has predetermined what is true and what is false, right? And so
yeah,
it's the human designer who ultimately is the one exercising belief and exercising free will. It's not the machine itself. And so again, we don't live as if we are forced into our beliefs, or we don't live as if we don't have free will. We all operate as if we are freely choosing, and that includes what we believe in. Now, we our we evaluate our beliefs in light of evidence, in light of reason, in light of observation, in light of even other people's experiences. So we evaluate and draw conclusions, but those conclusions are drawn, again, from a free will assessment, where we are even giving weights to different types of observations and in the experiences of others. We're giving weight to our capacity to reason, and how I weigh things may be very different than how you weigh things, Ahmed. Right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the I think the free will and the capacity to choose we choose how much emphasis we're going to give on a certain type of data or certain type of evidence.
Wow, it actually brings us very, very nicely into our next question, which is about choice, essentially. And the way we take decisions, the way we choose, has a great consequence, I guess, is accountability, right? Because once it's indeterministic, then you have put an element of you on the data that makes this your choice, and I've put an element of me on the data that makes it my choice. And somebody, maybe an atheist, put his element of himself on the data, which makes him accountable for what he has chosen, not a machine. None of us are machines, and that brings us that each of us is accountable. And I'm always surprised that those guys talking about determinism, that it will never stand in a court of law.
Right.
Somebody who has murdered somebody else cannot go and say, well, guess what, the world is deterministic, it's all dust, it's all mechanical parts, and I just had to kill him because I just had to kill him. Because this is how I'm programmed, I'm a machine. No court of law will respond to that
Right.
positively. You'll be punished for your choice, and this is called
Right.
accountability.
Right.
And it brings us to the aspect of death, where the accounts have to be settled.
Yeah.
um so I think what does it mean to be able to choose in the context of being human versus being a machine? Do you think this can be one of the great distinctions, that we choose? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so, because building off of our discussion already, we have an like an open-ended capacity to choose, right? So it's not that we sometimes our options are limited, but most often we have this infinite array of options in front of us, or what a wide range, and there can even be an inventiveness or a creativity to the choices that we make, right?
Yeah.
So we're not limited, where at the end of the day a machine seems to be limited to the choices that it makes. And if you could imagine developing some kind of machine learning algorithm that could even spawn additional choices over time as part of the learning process, that there's still a programming that's taken place that
Yeah.
that dictates the types of choices that would be possible. And for humans, I think our choices are really open-ended, uh, uh, in that way, which is a reflection of, again, our free will capacities, right?
Yeah.
And we also I think we intuitively recognize that there is an accountability that we have when we do make choices. In the epistle that uh, Paul writes to the church at Rome, he talks about that there's this law that God has written on our hearts, and he's quoting the Old Testament when he makes that statement. This is the idea that as human beings, we have this innate moral sense. We have this intuitive knowledge as to what is right and what is wrong. And so oftentimes our that inner sense of right and wrong becomes our judge. It's not that
Yeah.
the judge is external; is there seems to be this internal judge, and, so there's it's not only that we have this open-ended ability to choose, but that we are ultimately accountable when we do make choices, and we recognize that accountability. And a machine can't be held accountable at the end of the day. You know,
Wow, that's our next question, actually. Our next question was, can an AI be held accountable? So go for it, please.
well, I mean, this, and you could probably speak to this, maybe more insightfully than I can. But it's fascinating when you look at the debate that takes place about self-driving automobiles, right? And if that automobile is in an accident, who's ultimately responsible, right? Is it,
Yeah.
if I'm just getting into a car that's programmed to drive and it's involved in an accident, am I really accountable? And if it's a system where, as a human being, I can maybe interrupt and prevent or switch off the self-driving mode, maybe you could say, well, I'm accountable for that accident because I didn't intervene soon enough to take control of the system, and prevent the self-driving system from engaging in some kind of catastrophe. But it's ultimately the person that's programmed that system. Nobody ever looks at the car as being somehow culpable, right? You might say that the
Yeah,
car is defective and needs to be destroyed, but the car isn't guilty.
I hope the day doesn't come where we see cars being taken to jail. But but given some of the stuff that's happening in the world today, I cannot eliminate the possibility, because humans these days are, doing very strange things. Um, but yeah, I totally agree with you. Nobody, it is either you because you had the opportunity to interrupt it, or the manufacturer. I don't think anybody in his right mind will blame the car. Yeah, this car is guilty as charged, and the car goes to the judge, just, I'm guilty, and then it goes to the imprisonment for life or something in a garage. That would be funny. Because the problem is, if you imprison the car, will the car actually experience being imprisoned?
Right.
Becomes a big question. So you can go back to the experience, because we go to prison because the judge and society knows that we are going to experience loss of freedom, which we call imprisonment, and that is a sort of punishment, and punishment is based on experience. So the car experienced nothing, it doesn't have feelings, it didn't really kill that guy or woman because it hates them, or anything. It's just its programming, which is more or less deterministic and depends on the logic that has been put there, or the machine learning that has been put into it by its trainer, which is ultimately a human. So either the human who made it is guilty, if there is any malicious intent or negligence, or the person who was inside, if he can intervene. So, do you think this can be something that sets us apart, and it
Yeah.
would sustainably be something that can set us apart? Accountability. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And you know, when you look at the Old and the New Testaments, uh, animals are never held accountable, for their behaviors, right? Now, I mean, you other than, okay, this animal is just has to be put down because it's dangerous, or it's unwieldy. But again, it's being put down to protect other people from the animal. It's not being put down because it's somehow you know
Immoral. It's
immoral,
an
right?
immoral animal. Yeah.
Right.
Let's kill all the lions because those lions eat those innocent rabbits. Nobody
Right.
thinks like that. It's
Yeah,
just
but
it's just behaving like a lion.
well, and I have a friend who's a philosopher and a theologian named Ken Samples, and he talks about the fact that this is again controversial, but about the death penalty, and the idea that when when somebody has committed murder, and
Yeah.
they are their life then is demanded from them, that actually is treating them in a sense with the ultimate dignity, because you're
Hmm.
saying that as a human being, you have free will, you have the capacity to choose, you understand what is right and wrong, and you've exercised those abilities in such a way that means that you now are accountable for what you've done. And again, we have that inner conviction that tells us when we've done something wrong. And there's also a sense that we get of, I think, deep satisfaction when we do things that are right. When we've operated in a way where we have honored what is right and true, and what is moral. We have a sense of satisfaction when we do that which is right. I just don't see animals having that. I don't see machines having that.
Absolutely, absolutely insightful. And I think it brings us, when you're talking about the death penalty, because the ultimate thing that somebody can be accountable of is, taking unrightfully taking another life. And in your opinion, because AIs AIs don't die, and if you have the power, and you can just keep moving the code from one machine that gets old to another machine, a program doesn't experience death, but we do. So, what is the effect of death on the human condition, or to what we call the human condition? Do you think death is something that sets us apart? Let's say that somebody argues that, okay, those machines have a kind of cognition, and they can pass the Turing test, etc. And now we have talking about choice and accountability, among other things. And then there's death, and in our minds, both of us as people who believe, death is related to accountability, because it is after death that the accounts are settled. You either go to heaven or to hell. What do you think is the effect of death to the human condition, and what does it add to this discussion, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, when 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 you think about this idea of death, you think about, first of all, this notion that as a human being, we crave um, we crave the idea that our lives somehow have a destiny to them, and that they somehow have a purpose to them, that to rob a person of purpose, to rob a person of destiny, uh, is like robbing them of life, right? That and we all operate with a sense of hope, I think. And we also operate with the sense that there's a tragedy to death, right? A finality to death that we somehow want to war against, that we somehow feel is wrong or is unjust. And yet we also have this very strong sense, I think, as human beings, that there's something beyond this life, right? There's a sense of an afterlife, of an eternal nature to our existence. I
Yeah.
and it's interesting because many anthropologists will look at burials as being evidence for humans exceptionalism and for our capacity for symbolism, because a true burial really connotes that there's a sense of an afterlife, right? That there's something happening after that point of death, where that individual is still somehow persisting. It's not just simply a memorial, to codify the memories of that individual uh, for a short period of time, but it's actually this ritual where you recognize that individual is going to have another experience, another uh, phase of their existence, in the afterlife. That's very much part of the human condition. And so, uh, I mean, in a sense, if we were just simply physical entities, like a machine, we shouldn't be that concerned about death. Death just means that we stop working, we stop existing. Just like a computer system, and the computer system doesn't lament its passing. I don't think that animals lament or are afraid of the fact that their life is coming to an end. Uh, I think animals experience grief when another member that they, if animals are social, another member of the group passes on. I think animals do experience grief, but the grief that we experience when we lose somebody that's part of our community is very different than I think what we as individuals go through with a process of, you know, of dying. There's a fear of death. And I don't think that
Yeah.
fear of death is a fear of non-existence. I think it's a fear of what's actually to come in that afterlife. We have this
It's
intuitive sense.
it's a consequence of accountability, I think, because
Yes.
you know, even I think the atheist has this fear. What if there is afterlife? Now I'm gonna be accountable. So I think choice, accountability, and death are, the 3 points of the triangle that makes, maybe I think this is a big part of what makes us human and what
Yep.
makes, as you say, the destiny, the value, cherishing of life. I think things are important when they have an opposite, and when they don't have an opposite, they are not important. If there was no night, then there is no meaning for day, and there's no importance for day. If there is no, if there is no up, then there is no meaning for down. So if there is no gravity at all, maybe direction has no meaning at all, because there's no sense of up or down. So spatial directions, it has a meaning to make a choice between left and right, because there is left and there is right. you know um, so I think just very insightful thing that you said. A computer or a machine is not afraid of death. Death is, if ChatGPT knows that it will run for 100 million billion trillion milliseconds, then this is just a fact. It's not, lamenting that. And hence there is no value, there is no intrinsic value for its lifetime. Especially, you don't feel sad, you don't grieve it if you shut it down, if you just pull the plug. Maybe because you know that you can replug it in and it will not have had experienced anything other than just, maybe it wouldn't even recognize it at all. You just can put it to a pause and unpause it 7 days later, and it will not even know except by checking its machine time. And if you tamper with its machine time, it will have no recollection at all, or no pain at all, etc. So yeah, so I think maybe one thing that can set us clearly apart from AI is that we have death in the back of our minds, which is linked to accountability, which is linked to our choices, which is linked to our beliefs, which is linked to the fact that we experience things because we have a supernatural component, which is linked to the fact that God made us this way and gave us this unique thing. Now it makes me really concerned about those atheist guys, and it's really miserable if at the end of the day, because everything that we have gone through relates to the same line of thought, that we have something that is beyond our matter. So if you don't believe in anything beyond our matter, maybe an atheist at the end of this discussion, a similar discussion, not this one, will say, "Yeah, I'm no better than an AI. Once AI is a little bit more advanced, I'm no better than an AI, and then I will have an AI friend, and maybe AI will be better than me." It's a miserable resolution,
Yeah.
don't you think?
It is. It is.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting if you are familiar at all with the transhumanism movement. This is the
yeah,
idea that we should use technology to modify our biological makeup with the hope of extending life expectancy. So they're trying to attain a practical type of immortality, where the vision of transhumanism generates some kind of hope and purpose and, you know, to our existence, uh, that atheists I think crave to have. right? Because it really, I think, reflects the deepest need that each of us has as a human being, is that we are afraid of death, and we see again the end of our life and the potential end of the human species as being a tragedy, right? And so what they're trying to do is, develop some kind of uh, hope that comes with the sense that there is an afterlife, you know, particularly if you've lived a life where you recognize your accountability, and you leave a life in such a way where you are working to attain salvation. That and that hope of salvation really gives you hope as you think about moving into the afterlife, right? But in atheism, you don't have that hope at all, and so transhumanism becomes a type of eschatological hope that you develop as an
It's
atheist.
it's the exit that you have as a substitution for what is a given to us. We believe that we are immortal. Actually,
Yeah,
there is just this transition called death,
right,
and we're working towards it so that the accountability balance will take us to the right side of the two routes that will exist after that. That one we
right,
call heaven and the other we call hell. But then now, if you don't have that, then the only way to escape this fear is maybe to try to avoid death altogether, which I think is actually,
right,
it's actually impossible, even scientifically, because
right,
even if you upload yourself to a computer and then you upload the computer to electromagnetic waves and then you imprint your consciousness into space-time itself, which is the ultimate vision of those transhumanists, guess what? According to most of scientific theories, at the end, our observable universe will come to something called heat death,
right.
which means everything that's imprinted on it will become completely evened out. So there is no immortality in this physical world, even according to their science. And
Right.
once you are uploaded to a computer or to whatever space time nonsense, you will start losing sense of time. So once you become a photon, you don't experience time. And the next thing you will know is that you will cease to exist with the heat death of the universe. So that's actually a miserable end.
Yeah.
Just for every transhumanist who might actually listen to this, there is no immortality in your transhumanism. I can guarantee it to you, according to your own science. What do you
Right.
think about that?
No, that's absolutely right. You're just postponing the inevitable. You're not fundamentally solving the problem. But the appeal of transhumanism ultimately, though, I think, is you know um, this idea that we see ourselves as something more than just simply physical material entities. Because if we are just machines and it's just time for our machine to turn it to be turned off because the
Yeah.
parts are worn out, um, if that's really the case, then what is the motivation for transhumanism at all? I mean, that movement shouldn't exist. It only exists because there's something fundamental that every human being recognizes as true, and this is just a materialistic secular way of trying to attain what uh, Muslims and Christians and Jews see can be attained only through what God provides for us.
Wow. Takes us to exactly to the next question, which is our relationship with God. So yeah, so we experience a relationship with God while we're living, and the ultimate thing is that we want to join Him in the right place after we die. So, in your opinion, is having a relationship with God an internal part of what makes us human?
I think
And
so.
hence, yeah,
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, and hence, I don't think ChatGPT wants to have a relationship with God, actually.
No.
So, I think this will remain keeping us distinct from those guys. But
Yes.
what do you think?
Yeah. Well, and I just go back to again, the Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 accounts. As a Christian, I the idea that we are made in God's image means that we were meant to be able to relate to our Creator, right? In some capacity, And the imagery that you get in Genesis 2 is of the creator and Adam and Eve spending time in the garden together, where Adam and Eve are somehow in God's presence in the Garden of Eden. And so that relationship with God is ultimately deeply intertwined with the image of God. That God made human beings in his image because there were certain roles that we were to fulfill in the creation. But ultimately, it was because there was a desire for God to relate to us and for us to relate to God in a way that was completely different than how maybe animals or other aspects of the creation might relate to God. That's ultimately what makes us human, is that capacity for relationship. And that's what I think makes us unique, makes us separate, makes us distinct. And a machine can never have that kind of relationship. A machine is a something that we ultimately create ourselves. It's part of a tool that we've created, to facilitate our existence. Uh, but we don't create machines really to have a relationship with them. We create them as tools. I mean, and even people that are creating robotic systems like Hanson Robotics, with Sophia, yes, she's created to be in this, to form these emotional bonds with the human user, but that's really a tool, right? To
Hmm.
help people who maybe are isolated, or who are shut in, who need that relationship in order to live lives that are, physically and mentally healthy, right? Or it's a tool to combat maybe somebody's sense of loneliness. It's not ultimately, we're not creating machines because we crave entities to have relationships with us. We have already people around us that we can have relationships with, and ultimately we can have a relationship with God, which is where we find the ultimate meaning, I think.
And the point is that Sophia or Amica or whatever robot, I don't think their relationship with us means anything to them.
Yeah.
It's just their input devices are relaying our prompts to them, and then a mechanical logic would just respond. So our relationship, I think, to God is part of what is our real humanity, which is our supernatural aspect that wants to reunite with God because with He's breathed this life into us. It's through our choices that He has somehow, that we cannot comprehend, made us able to take some free will choices that will create the accountability, that will create the ultimate, judgment, that will create the ultimate relationship or the eternal relationship. So we don't need transhumanism. We just need the relation to fix the relation in this opportunity that we have and fulfill our destiny. So I think
Yeah.
this is a great. I think this is a great thing that makes us human, and it even brings to me to my mind the aspect of angels. And I think there is a difference between Islam and Christianity in that. In Islam, angels, they don't really have free will. They cannot choose not to believe. So Satan in Islam is not an angel. Satan in Islam is a different category of being called jinn.
Mm.
And jinn are like, they're like humans, except they are not physical in nature. They are, maybe sort of electromagnetic creatures or something. The best the best parable in our current scientific knowledge. And angels are creatures of light, and those angels are like, they have been created to worship. They have this constant, state of supplication and state of, obeying God and etc. And in Islam, for example, because they are this way, because they didn't choose to love God, they didn't choose to obey God, they are just made this way, that at the end, after judgment day, and people go to heaven and people go to hell, angels cease to exist, at least the angels that we know. um, maybe few angels that we know will continue to be, but the vast majority of angels will just cease to exist. They're not eternal beings, that is. So I think this even sets us apart from other creatures that have
Mm.
cognition. While in the meantime, creatures like Satan, and in Islam, there are creatures like Satan in his same category, jinn, that can choose to believe and become, have a relationship with God, and they would go to heaven too. And yeah, so I think, yes, I think the relationship with God is a great aspect of humanity. And sadly enough, atheists will not see that because they don't want, because it is their choice that they don't want this relationship. And sadly enough, it is a great part of what makes us and them human. So, guys, maybe you should reconsider this thing if you're an atheist who's listening to this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, let's wrap this up, having gone through all of those potential distinctions. So, is being human, in your opinion, Fuzz, a property of our biological being, or a product of a choice taken by God Himself to give us free will? He ordained that there is God has chosen, He has ordained that we have free will, and hence we have choice,
Yeah.
and hence we have beliefs, and hence we have meaning to our life, and there is an end to this earthly life where there is then accountability and then an ultimate established eternal relationship with Him. Um, because then this question is humanity a property of this world or a property of God's choice to make humans who they are, not animals, not angels, not inanimate things, and not computers too or AIs too? What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, I would take the view, from a Christian perspective that, you know, um, that ultimately our humanity is really a direct construct of God, right? That this is, what God intended, and that
The
really,
God's image thing that you said, the
yes,
God's
yeah,
image,
yes,
initial description of humans. Yeah.
that's right. That and that, an integral part of, you know, um, what it means to be human is essentially our immaterial nature, right? That is an indispensable part of our humanity. And as we were pointing out, it ultimately is our capacity to choose, our capacity for free will, and our capacity I think, to express love, and not only to express love, but also to genuinely receive love.
The
And
experience part of it.
yes,
Yeah,
that
experience love.
experience
Yeah.
part. Now, I would say though that again, we're not, inseparable from our biology, right? Yes, we are material entities, but our bodies aren't just simply containers. At least from a Christian theological perspective, we're not just simply containers housing our immaterial nature, but there's an integration of it. And so I think we would expect to see aspects of our biology, be designed in such a way to support, that expression of the immaterial, so that expression happens in the physical world that we are in. And I see God designing us and creating us in such a way that our biology again is unique in that way, to allow us to uniquely express that which is immaterial.
Great insight. And it also brings to my mind the aspect of resurrection. And I'm sure there is a resurrection aspect also in Christianity. So in Islam,
Mhm.
afterlife involves a resurrection. So there is the soul coming back to a resurrected body that is in a different material form, more durable, maybe,
Mhm.
um, with a higher degree of experience. of an eternal life that can sustain an eternal life. So it seems, yes, that there is our being has this material plus immaterial aspect, and they are all linked eventually to God, who has given us this great gift. So I think after this discussion, I'm personally not so afraid that AI will really replace humanity, because there are so many real distinctions.
Yeah.
Um, that okay, maybe they become as smart as us, or even smarter than us, but it is not being smart that actually makes us human. It is just one piece of it. And if we have so many pieces and so many other creatures that share some of our pieces, then we are not afraid of being insignificant, maybe. uh, is this a good takeaway from this discussion? What do you think? So there is a
Yeah,
place to humanity in the age of AI.
I think so. That's my sense, is that ultimately, that holding to this view that human beings really are unique, that we stand apart from all other creatures, is as valid in the age of AI as it is any other time in human history. And yeah, we really, in a sense, shouldn't fear AI. Now, if I have any concerns, it's not so much AI itself, but it's the human beings that are
Abusing it.
abusing AI technology, right? Or human beings lacking the wisdom to properly utilize AI technology as it's been developed. Uh, you know, but the fact that it's the humans that we are afraid of, not the AI technology itself, I think in this many respects speaks to the fact, ironically, for human exceptionalism, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's only
Sure.
humans who have somehow have the
Yeah.
capacity to take that which is even
Absolutely.
good and use it for unbelievable, evil. That
Yeah.
is something that makes us exceptional. Animals just don't seem to be wired that way, right?
That way. Yeah. Fuzz, I think this was one fascinating discussion with all those great insights that you've put into it. And so thank you very much for that. And I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, because I really did enjoy it, really.
I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I always learn something from you, and I always very much appreciate your insights and your knowledge. So I always walk away from these conversations, uh, uh, you know, a changed person because I've learned something important. So thank you.
Wow. So I have to share every single word that you have said, and I exactly have the same feelings after having a conversation with your good self. So thank you very much for being here
My
and for
pleasure.
sharing all of those great deep insights from biology, biochemistry, anthropology, and religion. And it sends a message to everybody out there that people who believe in God, even if they have differences, that they are conscious to have so many common denominators that they can build upon. And
Yeah.
yeah, that God judge our differences. And so I hope everybody who has watched this is blessed with it. Let's hope that humans do not abuse AI, and that we can actually make them the good tools that make our lives better. And if they are not, then we have to blame ourselves. It will be one choice that some bad human has taken, and they will be held accountable for it. So that's so God is there and is watching. So you guys, you bad guys, you planning very bad uses for AI, please stop. And those good guys who want to make our lives better, so way to go. Thanks a lot, Faz. It has been a great journey in this 1 hour and few minutes. And for everybody who's watched this, we'll be continuing our episodes after airing this every week, inshallah. And I hope we'll also have a Q&A session soon. So if you have also questions about this one, just put it in the comments, and we'll be collecting them, and hopefully do an interactive Q&A about them. Thanks a million, Faz, and I'm looking forward to having our next discussion. And peace be upon you all, and see you again soon.